Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, 5 years after the death of Osama bin Laden, the Middle East is plagued by instability and uncertainty. As political upheaval brings the potential for change in Iraq and elsewhere, is peace even possible? Later in our program, we'll sit down with religious leaders, including the 11th Panchen Lama, whose wise reflections will leave you thinking about the path to enlightenment in a modern world that is often anything but then. We begin in the Iraqi capital, Baghdad, where protesters demanding political reform have now left the heavily fortified Green Zone. Last Saturday, they broke into this area and stormed the parliament building after lawmakers failed again to approve new ministers. Along with the political turmoil, at least 32 people were killed and 75 others were wounded in the center of the southern Iraqi city of Samawa in 2 suicide car bombs claimed by ISIL. 5 years after the death of al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, the threat of terrorism seems to only grow larger. So can terrorism be eradicated at all?
Attacks that changed history. After the Islamic terrorist organization Al-Qaeda's infamous 9/11 attacks on New York City, the United States launched the War on Terror, focusing on countries associated with the group. As the leader of Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden was the major target. 10 years later, on May 2, 2011, an elite group of U.S. forces killed him.
The death of bin Laden marks the most significant achievement to date in our nation's effort to defeat Al-Qaeda.
However, bin Laden's death did little to stop the growth of terrorism. In the leadership vacuum, Al-Qaeda splintered into the groups Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and the notorious ISIL. Iraq, a major country fighting ISIL, is experiencing domestic political chaos and the ongoing terrorism threat, a state of affairs attributed by many to the U.S.'s war on terror. Responding to the leader's call last Saturday, supporters of the Shia clerk Muqtada al-Sadr broke into the restricted Green Zone in Baghdad and stormed the parliament building, waving flags and taking selfies after politicians failed to vote in a new cabinet.
I stand by the people today, no one else, and boycott all the politicians, except those who want real reforms, with all clarity and honesty, waiting for the great popular uprising and the major revolution to stop the march of the corrupt.
The protesters demanded that the government complete months-old reform promises, which aimed to replace current ministers with non-partisan technocrats in a bid to change the system of party and sectarian quotes and combat corruption. While the government was dealing with the protests, double suicide bombs claimed by ISIL killed at least 32 people in Samawa, southeast of the capital. After 15 years fighting terrorism, many observers believe security conditions are worse than ever. A solution to combating rampant global terrorism has yet to be found.
And for the discussion about the latest situation in Iraq, we are joined here in the Beijing studio by Ms. He Wenping, who is a research fellow from the Institute of West Asian and African Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Welcome, ma'am, to our program. Meanwhile, joining us from Baghdad in Iraq, we are having Mr. Ahmed Rashdi, who is the executive manager of the House of Iraq Expertise Foundation. And in Boston, we are having Mr. Jim Walsh, who is a professor of the Security Studies program at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Welcome to the three of you. First of all, may I ask our panelists from Baghdad in Iraq about the latest situation? Mr. Rashdi, we understand now the crowd withdrew with the call from Mr. Sadr. So what exactly are the reasons for them to, as a group, leave? And will they come back again?
Well, first of all, let's define the crisis, the political crisis that happened. Then after that, we're going to talk about what's happened at Saturday. Last Tuesday, actually, in the parliament, in the parliament session, the speaker, Dr. Salim Al-Jubouri, asked the protesting MPs to sit down and to talk about a new cabinet. they refused that and start to smash the whole of the parliament. Then they went to another hall, the speaker and the MPs, and start to negotiate about changing the cabinet, and they succeeded in about, let's say, 6 to 7 ministers changed inside the Abadi cabinet. Then after that, the speaker postponed the session until the Saturday because there are so many talks about real change for the whole Abadi cabinet with the new minister, with the new technocrat ministers. What's happened is that at Saturday is that the political blocs actually made stubborn action. They refused to change their ministers in a way or another and start to push the speaker to postpone the session until the 10th of May.
So you were, sir, Mr. Rushdie, at the very beginning of our discussion, define the nature of this incident. So in one sentence or two, what exactly is the nature of this incident, if you can?
It's a political one, ended to a revolution of the people.
All right. Professor Walsh, it's a very interesting situation. Vice President Biden was in Iraq and meeting with some of the religious as well as political leaders, but eventually it seemed that things were still boiling out of control. After he left, the occupation of the parliament began. What do you make of the nature of this incident?
Well, I think this is just an ongoing process in Iraq. You know, Iraq is sort of caught in the middle right now. Remember, previously it was al-Maliki who was in charge, and on the one hand, he was a strong man, and that's a bad thing. He favored Shiites. He didn't support or include the Sunni community, and so that caused great unhappiness. Now he's been replaced with someone who's more moderate in style, but the question is he strong enough to force through the reforms? He's being, he would like to have reforms on corruption and the cabinet, but there are entrenched political interests that do not want to see change because they benefit from the patronage system. They benefit from the corruption. And so, on the one hand, you had a strong man who was too strong and abused his power, and now we've sort of in a different situation where we have someone who's trying to be more inclusive, but is not strong enough to get those political reforms through. So this is just another step in the phase of Iraq trying to get its domestic house in order so that it can be a strong enough government that nevertheless is inclusive, so that Sunnis and Kurds feel like they are part of it all.
One of the things is that the religious leader that is calling on his followers to make a difference, and his followers did, is Shia. Well, the prime minister now in power is Sunni. So we see also a lot of differences in the clerical and the sectarial differences in the country. What exactly is the nature to you, Ms. He? Is it religion? Is it political struggle? Or is it about one of another failed case of outside intervention, particularly military intervention? What exactly is the nature of the case study of Iraq now, this time?
I think it's a kind of a combination of all those elements you have described. But the more element, I think, is coming from those power seeking and also the power struggle between different parties, different interest groups. Like those Sadr you mentioned, he's a very powerful cleric, but he also stands from those interests of Shia. And Shia now is the majority ethnic group in the Iraq, especially after topping down the Hosni Saddam. Because when Saddam was in power, that was dominated by the small minority called the Sunni. So now after he had been topped down, so in order to have a balanced political structure, that is saying if a president is Sunni and then prime minister will be Shia, and then even the speaker in the parliament also has been arranged in that way. But this kind of way is not easy to push through any real political reform. So always check and balance and fighting, in the parliament, and also nobody wants to give up their interests and give up their minister position. So that's why I think when the Maliki, the former Prime Minister Maliki, was in power, because he was strong man, like our American colleague has mentioned. So he's too strong, and then he wants to multiply all those things, just the favorite for his Shia. And then those Sunni has been marginalized to a great extent. That's why caused those, even IS stands out. They are saying, we are speaking for this Sunni. So I think it's a combination of things. This is chaos.
But Mr. Rushdie, may I have your views shortly if you can? If the ways of solving political problems now in Iraq is to occupy the parliament, where is the democracy or democratic system we're talking about when the government was established after the throwing down of Saddam Hussein? And if that is the way to resolve problem, how are we going to see a systematic institutional approach can be done or can be established in your country?
Well, frankly speaking, what's happened Saturday is actually it's just like waves of changing in Iraq. It started with the Maliki. He was too strong and too corrupted. And these are the two things that made Iraq ended to this way. And with the corruption, with the marginalization of the Sunnis, it ended with, and also have so many, let's say, disputes with the Kurds and even with the Shiite, ending ending with the country is so weak that it cannot stand for Daesh, which means that all these institutions that rebuilt it after 2003, all democratic institutions, have been weakened in a way or another, ending to the situation of the Saturday. This is first. Secondly, what's happened to the real Iraqi army and also for all other military security troops is actually going forward to the militia. So what's happened is that we are facing a non-institutional backgrounds for all aspects in Iraq.
Right.
Now, if we're going to call for reforms, it means that Mr. Abadi must do a drastic change inside his cabinet to rebuild all these institutions, which would need someone who is too strong and too honest. And I don't know actually, is Mr. Abadi is something like that or not?
Right. Mr. Rushdie, once again, very briefly if you can, what would all of this mean? Lack and the absence of power, the extreme so-called check and balance, not necessarily coming from a democratic system, but rather personality. What would that mean for the flourishing of possibility terrorism in your country and also in the surrounding areas? Very briefly from you.
Well, war against terrorism actually need three things that it's most important to destroy. Then after that, we're going to talk about fighting terrorism. First, you must fight ignorance, diseases, poorness. And all these three now existed inside the Sunni area. Exactly the Sunni area, which means that you need now so many efforts to fight these three, let's say, this triangle in a way or another to stop the ideology of Daesh, because the ideology of Daesh is depending on this triangle, but with the economical crisis of Iraq and the security and the political, it's obvious that it cannot be happened now. Maybe in 10 years, no one knows.
All right, Ms. He here in Beijing, observing from afar, is it a really boiling ground once again for the flourishing of terrorism?
Oh, yes, indeed. I think the situation there is very challenging and even becoming worse than before. Nowadays, even though through the 1.5 years, a very hard effort made by the international forces together, especially given this help coming from the United States, and then it seems that those extremist, radical groups, those ISO or the Daesh, has been defeated back. But I don't think they have been fully destroyed. Even this Mosul now, I think they have been under this attacking fighting for so many months. They want to retake it from Iraqi troops. But now with this political crisis, I don't think it's quite optimistic to retake this big city has been occupied by IS for such a long time.
So when we talk about terrorism, we talk a lot about IS, but of course a few years ago the main character is Al-Qaeda. Whether it's Al-Qaeda or IS, the root of terrorism has not been being taken care of. Let's take a look at some of the things that's been going on over the past few years when it comes to development of terrorism worldwide. More than a decade after Saddam Hussein was ousted and 5 years after Osama bin Laden was killed, terrorism is far from being eliminated.
On September 11, 2001, Islamic extremist group Al-Qaeda killed over 3,000 people in deadly terrorist attacks on the U.S. In retaliation, the Bush administration launched the anti-terrorist war on Afghanistan. On March 20, 2003, the U.S. launched an attack on Iraq, accusing then Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein of possessing weapons of mass destruction. That claim was never substantiated. On May 2, 2011, U.S. forces finally located and killed Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden in Pakistan's border region. But this didn't put an end to the spread of terrorism. On June 29, 2014, a former branch of Al-Qaeda declared itself the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, or ISIL, and proclaimed authority over all Muslims worldwide. Now ISIL has become a major threat to global security, controlling large swaths of territory in Iraq and Syria.
That is the latest situation. Of course, let's go to Mr. Walsh. It seems that regime change advocated by the Bush administration earlier has not worked, at least to root out terrorism. One died, but many others appeared.
Yeah, well, I think we have to put this in some context. Certainly the 2003 war in Iraq made things worse because it destroyed Iraq and left it, paralyzed and weak. But that's not the only thing going on here. And I, like many Americans, opposed that war in 2003. I think that definitely contributed to the formation of ISIS. But there are broader issues as well. I mean, some of it we've already mentioned. I think al-Maliki, as a strong man, that undermined the political rehabilitation in Iraq because Sunnis felt disaffected. So there's some responsibility on Iraqis here. But stepping back, we've had terrorism for more than a century. It used to be left-wing terrorism in Europe. We had terrorism in Latin America. So this is nothing new. And as applies to the Middle East, there's the Arab Spring. We had dictators in power for decades. Eventually they fell. When they start to fall, that leads to instability. And when you have instability, that creates spaces for terrorist ideology to take root. So there are larger historical forces going on here. And then there are individual things on the ground that have created opportunities for terrorists or made things worse.
Right. There has been a lot of thoughts about what exactly it meant for regime change and what exactly it meant to be done for institutional building. Mr. Rushdie, the question is, how much price you have to pay for a regime change? How much price you have to pay for institutional building? How much would you have the patience to deal with terrorism, which is a byproduct of this process, and eventually be able to not forget your eternal goal, which is to have institutional building?
Yeah, you're true. It's a huge price. It's from the lives of Iraqis, their wealth, their destiny, their future, and so on. The problem is that we have a new war named as ethnic war, in 2006, and now we are separated between each other. So we are not unified in a way or another, first, and secondly, we are unified in problems. All Iraqis, even the Kurds, now suffering from economical crisis. We're all suffering from political crisis. We're all suffering from security crisis. Right. We need a new leaders. That's why the reforms is very important now. We need a new leaders to start to build up a path to rebuild Iraq in a way that Iraqis are responsible, not the others.
Ms. He, will new leaders make magic happen?
Well, we cannot count on some kind of magic new leaders. So maybe the Maliki has been blamed, and now the Abadi has been blamed. Who knows the next? So I think the price, not only the price issue, the process also is very long. So we have to bear this in mind. That is, to top down some regime, that's easy thing, but to build on another authority, I think it's a harder one.
Of course, that has been repeated, the message, many times, but it is very important people really understand what is the real essence of this message. Thank you so much, He Wenping, Ahmed Rushdie, and Jim Walsh. Really appreciate it. Thank you for being with us. Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our final segment coming right up. We sit down with the 11th Panchen Lama and other religious leaders whose wisdom is a refreshing antidote to a modern world that is often anything but enlightened. You're watching World Insight on CCTV News. I'm Tian Wei. The world we are living in today is not just the one of politics and economics, but also of arts and culture, science and philosophy. It's a diverse world in which discussions about religion can be intellectually fascinating as any. That truth was definitely reflected in the recently concluded Boao Forum for Asia for the year 2016, one of the most influential international forums held in China every year. In the year 2015, religious topics became a part of the Boao Forum for Asia when the session Talk to Religious Leaders was added to the program for the very first time. I had the honor of moderating that session, and today we are excited to bring you an excerpt of that intense intellectual discussion. The participants include the 11th Panchen Lama from Tibet, representing Tibetan Buddhism, the great supreme matriarch of Dhammayutta order from the Kingdom of Cambodia, and the abbot of Po Lim Monastery in Hong Kong, representing Theravada and Mahayana, respectively. This is an extremely rare public discussion by Buddhist leaders. It's also one of the rare public appearances of the 11th Panchen Lama from Tibet. The title Panchen Lama means great scholar. So let's learn a bit about the 11th Panchen Lama first, and then return to our talk with religious leaders.
Tibetan Buddhism holds that the soul of a senior lama, or Rinpoche, is reincarnated in the body of a child upon the senior lama's death. After being confirmed through a golden urn lot drawing in front of the statue of Sakyamuni Buddha in Jokhang Temple on November 29, 1995, and approved by the State Council, Panchen Erdeni Choski Rigyal Po succeeded as the 11th Panchen Lama, and on December 8th enthroned on Tasho Hampo Monastery in Shigatse, Tibet. Panchen Erdeni Choski Rigyal Po serves as Vice President of the Buddhist Association of China, Honorary Director of Tasho Hompo Monastery Management Committee, and Standing Committee member of the 12th CPPCC National Committee. He has attended all 4 sessions of the World Buddhist Forum since 2006, the 16th China-Korea-Japan Buddhist Friendly Exchange Conference, and the 27th Conference of World Fellowship of Buddhists.
Your Excellency, the 11th Panchen Lama, you are young in age, yet deeply respected and loved by Buddhist monastics and believers alike due to your strict adherence to Buddhist precepts and diligent practice. People believe that calligraphic works reflect one's mind, and one of your works says, kindness in mind, kindness in deeds, kindness in practice, kindness in results. All fortunes originate in kindness. So I'm wondering if you could share with us your understanding of kindness. Will kindness really lead to happiness?
Buddhism has been practiced for more than 2,500 years. In its long history, Buddhism has played a unique role in promoting civilizations and benefiting people in various regions of the world. Buddhism is unique because it can purify our minds. By practicing Buddhism, we can gain peace of mind. The most important teaching in Buddhism is kindness. Buddha taught 84,000 approaches to attain enlightenment, and there are so many sutras that a lifetime may not be enough to read them all. But in summary, I think the essence of Buddhism is to promote kindness and to restrain evil. We should do whatever kinds of things we can do and refrain from doing any evil things. We often say do not do any evil deed, even with the justification that it is a small thing, and do not refrain from doing a good deed on account of its seeming trivial. I think we have the same understanding of kindness in Buddhism, whether it is Tibetan Buddhism or Theravada Buddhism or Han Buddhism. And my understanding is that the fruit of happiness comes from kindness, and the fruit of sufferings is evil.
以苦为果的因叫恶。
Would you please elaborate further?
每一个人都是追求幸福的。
Everyone in the world, even a being as small as an ant, is pursuing happiness. However, our mind is blinded by ignorance and often eroded by three major afflictions: attachment, aversion, and ignorance. As a result, we lose our way. We pursue the things that we think are good, but in fact it will cause the fruit of sufferings. Buddha tells us what is kind and evil. Buddha is like a doctor, and we are like patients, and our illnesses are attachment, aversion, and ignorance. Buddha often offers remedies for our illnesses, but the key to solving our problems lies in ourselves. Buddha is not a creator and cannot change our fate. Buddha is like a doctor and a father pointing us in the right direction. So the key to practicing Buddhism is within ourselves. That's to say, whether you find yourself in happiness or suffering in the future depends on what you're doing now.
取决于自己现在的所作所为。
善呢是离关注的一个话题，如何达到善？当然这就是在我们佛教当中所说的要。The path leading to kindness in Buddhism is practice, but how do we carry out the practice? The methods in different Buddhist traditions are usually different. For example, Your Holiness belongs to Theravada tradition, which features unique meditation practice. We all know that Theravada and Mahayana differ in terms of meditation methods. How should we cultivate ourselves through meditation? May I have your input, Your Holiness?
In Buddhism, the Buddha taught that all of us should respect and practice meditation. Meditation is the best way to purify our minds and hearts. The mind is the source of everything. But if we purify our minds, the mind can lead us to harmony and peace. So in all Buddhist beliefs, we don't differentiate between north or south. All of us need to do meditation. Actually, there are many styles of meditation, but Buddhist leaders each have their own style. So they lead their followers through their individual methods. Meditation is like taking medicine when we fall ill. We can take medicine in the morning, afternoon, and evening. And if we do take that medicine, our minds can be purified. Meditation is the best way to purify the mind and to control greed, anger, and desire. When we practice meditation, it can help us avoid disease and suffering.
Well, as this is a dialogue with religious leaders, I cannot help but ask you with great interest and curiosity, what do you consider to be important qualities for religious leaders? What responsibilities and obligations should a religious leader undertake? And what kind of person can eventually become a religious leader?
首先呢，宗教领袖不是疯的，是要做的。
To be a religious leader is not just a title, but more importantly, you should accumulate virtues. Religious leaders need to promote Buddhism and benefit all beings through their actions. To become a religious leader, you need to be a religious believer first and promote Buddhism. You should study and practice the Dharma diligently and tirelessly. Secondly, religious leaders should be highly knowledgeable about religious teachings and should set a moral example to win the respect of his followers. He should also undertake responsibilities and obligations, which means, to be specific, to see all beings as mothers or children. A religious leader should have a loving heart and the courage to set all beings free from their sufferings. Only a person like this is qualified as a religious leader.
脱离苦难的勇气，只有这样的人才能被称为宗教领袖。
Where does your courage come from? The followers may claim that they get courage from their leaders, but where do religious leaders get their courage?
首先说这个勇气呢，是大爱之心，或者说是菩提之心。
Courage comes from a loving heart and the spirit of enlightenment. Ladies are usually tender, but they will devote their lives to their children, and they're brave enough to stand out to save their children. That's the courage inspired by a loving heart.
因为这种大爱激发出来的勇敢。
How do you practice Buddhism in your daily life? We're actually fairly interested in this. For example, how long do you engage in sutra study? Apart from that, as the 11th Panchen Lama, what kind of major practice do you perform in your daily life?
首先呢，学习佛学知识是要有一定的时间的积累。
Learning Buddhism is a long course of accumulation, but for each day, I think the most important thing is thinking and understanding, which should lead to integrating what you've learned from books into your mind. Tibetan Buddhism has unique ways of practicing by stages. It elaborates on one's process of transitioning from being a non-believer toward liberation and nirvana. Reading sutras is not just about improvement of knowledge, it's about the integration of your heart and Buddhism. We are patients. We are often eroded by attachment, aversion and ignorance. So we need to cure our illness of afflictions by following the Buddha's compassionate teachings. Buddha taught 84,000 approaches to attain enlightenment, and of course that's only a rough figure. In fact, no matter how much trouble you have, Buddha has a way to solve it.
实际上，众生有多少种烦恼，佛陀就有多少种方法来进行对治。
But given the 2,500 years of Buddhism history, many teachings in sutras are about things hundreds and thousands of years ago. Won't the solutions to those problems outdated today? For example, today's people are more interested in our outer space exploration. In that context, will the sutra appear to be outdated? I guess this is a question many friends want to ask.
佛教产生于2500多年前。
Yes, Buddhism was born 2,500 years ago. That was during an awakening period for human civilization. There were lots of great thinkers like Aristotle from the West, Confucius from the East, and Shakyamuni Buddha from India. I think the problems they faced and the answers they provided are still relevant today. In terms of Buddhism, as long as the major afflictions in our mind are not eliminated, Buddhism will never be outdated. Once all the afflictions have been removed, then we can say, mission accomplished.
都已经调伏对治完了，可能佛教的任务也就完成了。
Venerable Master Jing Yin, these days, people are concerned about environmental challenges. How should we understand the relationship between human beings and nature? What kind of attitude and behaviors should we keep when we are faced with threats due to various pollutants, including haze? What inspirations can we get from Buddhism?
In the past 100 years or so, great changes have taken place in human society. Development of science and technology has equipped human beings with wings, but many people have blind faith in the power of science and technology. This blind faith has fostered our stupid belief that human beings can do whatever they want, as though we could control the whole world and decide the fate of other species. That's why our activities have created an astonishing effect on our environment, causing frequent natural disasters. I think one of the core reasons is our ignorance and arrogance. We have no fear and reverence. The other one, I think, is greed. To benefit ourselves, we are even willing to take the risk of sacrificing our living environment. Everything in the world is subject to causes and conditions. Nothing is independent and no phenomenon can exist in isolation. Human beings are no exception. When it comes to the concept of emptiness or sunyata in Buddhism, it doesn't refer to avoid, it means inclusiveness. This is a very important part of Buddhist teachings. For example, we often see the phenomenon of intolerance in our society. People don't trust each other and can't integrate into society. Just like when a stone drops into water, they are still two separate objects. But in the concept of Buddhism, you need to see yourselves as salt. When salt dissolves into water, it looks like the salt disappears, but in fact it becomes part of the water and it owns the whole bottle of water. That's to say, if you devote yourself to your family or society, you become part of them. If one really understands that he is only part of nature, and to cause damage to nature means to harm oneself, he will naturally keep reverence in his decisions. That's why Buddhist teaching stresses that bodhisattvas keep reverence for causes, while ignorant people keep reverence for results only. When I discussed this with Master Panchen earlier, he had an interesting metaphor. He thinks science and technology are like a sharp sword. When the sword falls, it might cause great damage, so we must use our mind to hold the sword.
That is a really interesting analogy, I have to say. What exactly do you mean, Master Panchen?
We are living in a time of rapid development of science and technology and a highly developed material civilization. We're in the information era and the world has become a global village. It's brought tremendous convenience to us, but the development model focusing on materialism solely without adequate respect to spiritual aspects will have a double-edged sword. While it makes our lives easier, we also see the emergence of weapons of mass destruction, such as nuclear weapons, biological weapons, and chemical weapons. These are all outcomes of material development. In order to avoid a bad fate for all mankind, I think we need to solve the problems that lie within our minds. UNESCO's 1945 constitution states that wars start in the minds of men. It's in the minds of men that the defences of peace must be constructed. In fact, Buddha taught us more than 2,500 years ago, the mind creates everything. True world peace will be dependent on peace of mind. We must start by purifying people's minds and reforming human nature. Only inner peace and tranquility can bring external harmony and peace. And eventually, a harmonious family, a harmonious society, and a peaceful world.
Well, I don't know how others feel, but at this moment, I really feel that I am sitting here traversing in time. The 11th Panchen Lama is a young man in age, like a common youth interested in the same problems all humans face. But he is also a man drawing on a vast pool of wisdom from 2,500 years of Buddhism. It seemed that in his being, we can find all the accumulated wisdom and enlightenment of the 10 former Panchans. Discussion with the religious leaders, including the 11th Panchen Lama. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of our program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You will be able to find us. Or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching. And tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.